Hello, everyone. Welcome to our presentation entitled Transforming Service Delivery, Supporting SEL or Social Emotional Learning Virtually During COVID-19. We want to take a second and introduce ourselves to you. To start, I'm Matthew Love. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Special Education at San Jose State University. My research focuses on supporting schools implementing practices aligned to the Universal Design for Learning guidelines in the classroom and ultimately supporting flexibility and student success.
Hi, my name is Maggie Marschner. I'm currently the principal of all-girls Catholic Preparatory 6 through 12 school in Thousand Oaks, California. My career spans public education and private, K through 12, and at the university level. I'm very excited to be here today.
We want to go ahead and give you an overview of the topics that we're going to talk about today. To start, we're going to focus on what the context of school transition to remote learning looked like, both in spring 2020, as there was that immediate need to transition to remote learning, and then what the summer and beginning of fall 2020 looked like as we were planning in somewhat of an uncertain time for what the 2020-2021 school year looked like. We also want to discuss the role UDL played in the successful transition to in both spring and summer. So to do that, we're going to go over kind of the plans that were developed. Obviously, in spring 2020, there was Plan A, which were monitoring the crisis transition. It needed to happen immediately, and we were responding to a crisis. So we wanted to make sure that teachers and students and families had the supports they needed immediately. Then, as we were planning in the summer and different guidelines and recommendations came out from the state and local health departments, we'll discuss kind of Plan B through Z, because it felt like every day we were kind of, making adjustments as necessary and as required by the state and local health departments. We also want to highlight teacher creativity, because as much as we planned from the leadership side, it was really teachers and the creativity and flexibility that they had that really supported this successful transition for Lorena. And we're hoping that some of those ideas can be shared with you and maybe influence how you support students in your classrooms and in your schools. And then finally, we want to wrap up with highlighting some of the lessons we've learned, but then focusing on next steps we can take, because COVID will end one day. We will move back to face-to-face teaching, but we don't want to lose any progress or skill sets that we've developed now that a majority of teachers have actually had experience utilizing online or hybrid models of teaching. We want to discuss how we can build that into all classrooms in the future to support all students. So to start, I want to give Maggie the opportunity to introduce you to her school and kind of the context she operates under day to day, and now that she's in remote learning.
Thank you, Matt. So to provide a little context, when we began the 2019-2020 school year, our school, Lorena, had just implemented a 5-year strategic plan called Her Future, Our Focus. We had a lot of stakeholder input from our community, our parents, our families, and of course, our teachers and our students. When we began the school year and we were creating our professional development plan, a lot of the input we received from our teachers were around challenges and motivations that they were seeing in students around technology. They really wanted to leverage technology positively, and they were finding that they were struggling with how to leverage it in the classroom in a positive way. So we were beginning the year in that way, and they were seeking professional development around those areas. And so as a team, we began the beginning of the year looking at universal design for learning, and they were seeking input in that area. So we developed a year-long plan that was built into our 5-year plan around these next generation strategies, looking into multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression. And they were really excited to dig into that and build it into their professional learning communities, and into their horizontal and vertical alignment. At the time, no one knew about COVID-19. We didn't know how building this into our 5-year plan or building it into our professional development for the year would play into COVID-19, but it was truly providential and very helpful. But the beginning of the year, that's what we were working on. We decided to dive into it, and we really strategically laid out the year by breaking off into our professional learning communities and looking at building out our lessons and designing the year by actively looking at our standards and thinking, how can we leverage technology in a way that our students are really utilizing it to take on that cognitive load and that burden and really dig into their learning and be excited and find ways to really engage in their learning. And so we were excited to begin the year that way, and that was the start of it all.
And that's where I came in. So I was lucky enough that Maggie wanted to bring me in to deliver some of those professional developments surrounding topics related to universal design for learning. And I was fortunate enough to get to know her teachers and really dig into the plan it is that they were developing, which ultimately really supported that transition to remote learning. So prior to that, teachers had really been steeped in the ideas of being flexible, providing students multiple pathways for success, and really utilizing technology and flexible learning design to support that provision of multiple means of representation, flexible and multiple options for assessment. And it really supported that transition to remote learning where all of us continue to need to be flexible in order to meet the needs of our families and our students. So Maggie, if you could just tell us a little bit about what day one on the ground looked like and how, teachers in that initial, the crisis response supported students. I think that'd be super helpful.
Absolutely. So we had been, having a really engaging, exciting professional development year where we were having whole group professional development. Our PLCs were really picking up speed, and we were engaging in learning walks and observing our peers. It was an exciting time, and COVID-19 hit. We were told on March 12th that there was a stay-at-home order put in place. We were fortunate enough that on March 13th, we had a professional development day already planned, which we turned into a pickup day for our students where they were able to safely pick up items that they needed to return home. And then Monday, we engaged in distance learning immediately. So our students did not miss a day of instruction. It was not easy to transition to distance learning, even with all the professional development that our teachers had. We're fortunate that they had begun their work with leveraging technology and planning together the way they did. It provided them a solid foundation, and the transition for our students, the way they had been actively working with their online platforms and engaging in multiple ways with their curriculum was very helpful. There were really exciting ways that they were able to demonstrate their learning. Some of my favorite ways that our teachers engaged their students was one way to create an argumentative oral argument is our girls were baking cookies, and then they had to film themselves providing an oral argument for why their cookies were the best. And then they were they had a rubric where they judged their peers' oral argument. Some very creative ways. World War II, they created a radio show to demonstrate their understanding of society during the time of World War II in history class. Just some very, very creative ways that they could engage in their learning. This was so important during that time for a few reasons. We really wanted to balance our students' screen time and their social and emotional wellness. This was a huge priority for us, and we're going to go into that a little bit more. But during this transition, the reason we were so excited about being able to transition quickly for our girls is we wanted to keep them actively engaged in their learning and their instruction, because we knew how important it was for them and their wellness that they really didn't feel a lull and they remained that connection to their teachers with their relationship and their education. So thank you, Matt.
So I'll have you share some of those, some of the data that you collected, related to, like you said, it was a really rapid transition. You had a day to prepare on Friday, and then you were back online Monday. And I think, it always reinvigorates me that teachers, have that can-do spirit, and it's why I love our field of education. Can you talk about kind of how that rapid transition and then that focus on maintaining connectedness to teachers related to parent satisfaction and some of the student feedback you got, and just how you maintained engagement through attendance with your kiddos?
It's very important for us that we maintain that cycle of communication. We knew that, communication is always important, but in a time of crisis, it's vital that we maintain our community and that we understand exactly how our girls are doing. So we, as a leadership team, had a cycle of communication where we were seeking feedback from our families and from our students at a holistic, whole school level. But our teachers also engaged in individual feedback cycles with their classrooms, both at an instructional level. How are you doing, with the work I'm providing, the level of work? Is it too much on the screen? How much is the workload? Is it feeling like homework, too much, engagement this way? Do we need more project based? Do you need more activity where you're not sitting down? Things of that level, tracking their instructional data as well as their emotions. So we had drilled down data all the way to the classroom as well as whole school data. We did that, and then it informed our practice. We actually changed our instructional schedule before the end of the school year. So, we left in March. We got the order March 12th. And by that Monday, we were in distance learning. And I believe it was mid to the end of April that we changed our instructional schedule based on parent and student feedback. We felt it was extremely important that that instructional schedule was informed by how our students and families were feeling with the screen time. We believe that screen fatigue is very real, and that our students' engagement with their teachers, that relationship that they're building is important. Life synchronous instruction is extremely important, but their activity level and their engagement off the screen with their instructional material is also very important. So finding that balance is a communication process with the students and the families. So by maintaining that communication, which takes a lot of work, by doing so, we maintained a 98% attendance rate and a 91% parent satisfaction rate. So we're very proud of that. And we're working this year to do the same thing.
And what was nice for me is that I was the person tasked with providing ongoing support related to universal design for learning for the professional learning communities at Maggie's school. And in remote learning, I would just place a moderate challenge on them to provide as many options to parents and students as possible, in that here are a few ways you can engage with a live lecture or possibly an asynchronous lecture. Here are ways that you can demonstrate your learning. And Maggie shared a lot of those examples, and a lot of them, always impressed me with how creative teachers can be, and how with that alignment of your goals, creating a rubric, your methods, materials, and assessments, you can let students demonstrate their creativity as well. And again, always, like the UDL guidelines highlight, focus on engagement. How are we constantly staying in touch with students, their families, and how are we ensuring that they have a place to go where, in a time of COVID-19, where stress and the minor traumatic effect or even the major traumatic effect it might have on students, how can we provide school as a place to go to kind of escape all of that for a while? And I really think that's what led to that successful transition in spring 2020, and just Maggie's ability and willingness to be flexible, to change, a school or a bell schedule mid-year based on feedback and, in accordance with what parents needed. I think is a lesson that we can all take in flexibility and just being willing to meet students and families where they're at. And then once spring 2020 came to an end, there was a bit of a breather in the summer, but then it was also, what are we going to do in fall 2020? Will we be able to reopen schools? This is something that happens once every 100 years or so. So we couldn't really predict what it was going to look like. There were times where it looked like going back to school face-to-face was a possibility. Maybe we could do it socially distant. Maybe we could bring some students on campus. Some students can stay at home and we'll do cohorts. So Maggie, if you could talk about kind of what that looked like, how you kept your head above water, and kind of the voices you brought in, before we get into some of the more specific details in the next slide, that would be great.
Keeping your head above water, that's a great way of putting it. So I would go back to what you just mentioned. Flexibility is very important, and another piece we spoke about, which is communication. We put together a return to campus task force because we noted that this is a community effort, or we needed our entire school community to have a voice in this process, and we needed expertise. This is, as you said, completely unprecedented. That word's used quite a bit, but it's used quite a bit because it's true. So we brought together a return to campus task force, which was comprised of medical, legal, health, security, spiritual expertise, so that we could ensure that we heard their expertise, listened to their voices, reviewed all the documentation that was coming down from the state level, federal level, local level, to inform all the plans that we needed to make. We needed to prepare for possible on-campus, hybrid, and distance learning models. So we put together 3 different distinct on-campus, a Lorena on-campus experience, a Lorena hybrid experience, and a Lorena at-home experience. We played around with them quite a bit. We spoke frequently. I think we were here all summer, all hours, felt like 24 hours a day, but it was very important to us that this was a fluid process and that we were open to all feedback. This, I think, has been a global experience for all educators, and it's really important that we maintain an open mind and understand that this is a fluid process and everyone is learning. So we spent that time preparing and being really open to the process.
And like we said, there's multiple plans and there was multiple models, and having been a part of that, I remember, parent feedback, teacher feedback was super important, but we kept going back to universal design for learning and, really highlighting how can we be flexible. engagement, I think we had that piece down. We knew we needed to be in touch with families. We needed to communicate, and we needed to make things clear to them. And I think the feedback they gave you was pretty respondent to that, right? But then it was, what does instruction look like? We've had 8 to 10 weeks of experience teaching remotely since March. But what does it look like now that that might be a full-time option? I remember those discussions and just thinking about what we could do to leverage that experience, but again, focus on moving past the belonging. And now that, you know, the COVID-19 experience of being at home and not necessarily being able to socialize with your friends was beginning to wear on not just us, but students as well. So I know you talked about the models, but can you talk about kind of the task force that you brought together, just the different voices? I know you kind of previewed them a little bit, and then talk about what your priorities were for your school kickoff as we headed into fall 2020.
Well, our biggest priority, you know, we kept going back to universal design for learning and kind of, you know, trying to wrap our mind around these models. And really, as you said, when we kept drilling down to it, our teachers are professionals and they do know instruction, and they kept going down to it and thinking, this is what we do, and we have been steeping ourselves in universal design for learning. So let's go back to these basics and translate it to all these different environments, and let's get to the heart of what we do. And the heart of what we do are relationships, right? How are we translating all this work? We started it last year, and one of the strongest things we were doing are creating all these different ways we were reaching out to our students. And what that's doing is also building relationships, because the students were feeling connected to, they were feeling listened to. All those different opportunities and flexibilities are ways that your students feel connected to. So how can we leverage that even more? Because we were all aware that by this point and heading into a new school year, the students were going to be feeling even more depleted. That was our concern. And a huge voice on our task force was our mental wellness team. What were we going to do for our students' social and emotional well-being? What were we going to do for our faculty and staff's social and emotional well-being? So that became really the leading charge for us, because we knew without that foundation, how does learning, you know, really happen? So we felt that that needed to be the enveloping blanket for the year. And so that became our primary goal. And really, we realized, you know, you can't really separate the two, and that the work we did with the feedback in our instructional schedule the year before was a big part of that mental wellness. So a lot of time went into our master schedule, our on-campus master schedule in the event of that, our hybrid master schedule, and then a full distance learning model instructional schedule. We created 4 different models. We sought feedback for each model, and then we adjusted them, had more conversations. It was quite a lengthy process. At this point, we have surveyed our parents. We're about 4 weeks in, and we've gotten more feedback on the model that we created. This specific model was created with screen time and live synchronous versus asynchronous in mind. It is created to systematically give students gap time so they're not on the computer too much, and to build in that universal design for learning time where the students have their teacher, there's engagement, and they also have those multiple ways that they can be grappling with their content and engaging with it. And they're also off the screen with supports built in from their teacher. So it's been a very thoughtfully designed, proactively designed instructional schedule. But we view this process as very fluid and informed by our stakeholders. That is the goal right now for this school year.
And then, so like Maggie was saying, I want to make more explicit connections. I was so impressed, with how teachers responded in that crisis. But then it was time to get creative and innovative as we headed into fall 2020. And then prioritizing social emotional learning, balancing that active and passive learning, how much screen time. I think it's something we can all relate to, is talking into a screen all day and then maybe seeing someone else every so often really wears us down. So providing opportunities to get away from the screen or collaborate with someone else, and just providing multiple options. Like Maggie said, when they weren't live, they could still reach out to a teacher for support. They could fall back on collaborative assignments where they could communicate with peers for support. Again, just finding multiple and flexible ways to engage students. Screen time, we've talked about it. Actively engaging with learning. We didn't want it to be a sit and get model. We also wanted students to engage in those more rigorous, how do I now apply my knowledge? But if I need support, where can I find that? Again, falling back on, I can email my teacher, I can set up office hours, providing multiple options for action and expression, supporting independence. I feel like most teachers have become tech support as well. I think the saying of 2020 is, hey, you're on mute, or hey, I can't see you. But going beyond that, helping students log in, navigate kind of how to access learning materials, supports, has become part of a teacher's job. And then, like Maggie said, communicating with parents, finding different ways to let parents know what's going on, make any changes necessary. I think the implementation hasn't been perfect, right? We all stumble at times, but being willing to be flexible, agile, and make changes as necessary has really impressed me. So really focusing on making those explicit connections to universal design for learning, starting with how do we make kids happy and how do we make them want to show up to school every day, is something that's important. And in this next slide, I'm super excited for you to share kind of what you did in the non-academic sense to make kids want to come to school. So before we get into the lessons we've learned and kind of the next steps, I'd really like you to share, Maggie, how you prepared both on the teacher side, the parent, student, and family side, but then also how you really leverage the unconsidered talents of teachers sometimes to continually support your students' mental wellness.
So for this upcoming school year, when we were really digging deep about the different models and we were kind of getting overwhelmed thinking, how are we going to plan PD? We got to think about face-to-face and hybrid. And, we're thinking of all this terminology that we get ourselves whipped up about. We decided to just go back to the instructional model and take a week of orientation where we go through UDL again in our instructional model and just very gently apply it to the online virtual world. And we engaged in PD about building your online classroom and delivering instruction and assessment, but really taking what we already know and saying, we already know this. This is what we do. This is what we're professionals with, and gently applying it to the online classroom. So we took a week to do that and really build our own norms, build our own expectations, build our own agendas. And then we translated that and took a week with the students and walked them through the same processes. We took the time after that to survey our parents about 2 weeks in, and we asked them, did your student have a positive experience taking a week to orient themselves to a virtual classroom? And then did your students have a positive first week with their academics after having that week? We received an 85 to 91% positive feedback for that. So we're really happy that we took that time and front loaded that with the students, because again, our goal is that they feel emotionally safe in their virtual classrooms and comfortable navigating it. Because if it's simple to navigate and they understand what they're doing, and it's not, overly jumbled. They feel that they're in their classroom with their teachers. They'll feel safe and secure to learn. So what was the second part of your question, Dr. Love?
The second part was, once you got students into school, right? You said they felt safe, they felt secure, they felt welcome. How did you build in time throughout the day and allow teachers to do things that were outside of a typical instructional activity to continue to maintain that student mental wellness and belonging at school?
I think this is twofold. So it's very overwhelming at the start of this year. So there's a little bit that goes into this. One, our teachers have structured planning time where they're given that space where they're able to have the freedom to follow their creativity, which is what proactive design, is all about. Leverage your skills and talents for your students. And as their leadership team, I want them to explore their creativity and open that door for their students. So they know that they have that opportunity, and bring it to math, bring it to science, open that door up for your students. So they've been doing, when they balance that screen time and off the screen time, it's especially a wonderful opportunity to have that creativity for their students. We have had our theater teacher working with our other teachers so that the girls have opportunities to write monologues in other classes. And our chef in the cafeteria has offered opportunities for the girls to have cooking classes at different times of the day. Our vocal arts teacher has found ways to have the girls have singing contests and baking classes, just all kinds of things that when they work together, when they have that time to work in an interdisciplinary fashion as well, it gives the girls so many ways to work together as well in really fun and engaging opportunities that alleviate the way you're feeling. If you can even listen to a podcast and walk, the teachers will say, how about you just plug in and you listen to this, and I want you to walk for 15 minutes while you're listening instead of sitting on the screen. There's so many ways that they can do that because they have the opportunity within the schedule to collaborate. Those are just a few examples of what they've been doing. But I'd like to caveat that with less is more, in the sense that use your creativity, but don't feel overburdened with making it complicated. Just like the virtual classroom. If the girls can click, click, and find their stuff, it doesn't have to be too crazy. We just have to be able to connect, find one another, make it fun and engaging, and we'll learn. It doesn't have to be too crazy.
So thinking about this, right? I know it's a stressful experience. Like you said, it's been a shared global experience where all of us are in this together, trying to figure it out and navigate it. But historically, we know when we go through these things, innovation happens regardless. So we know that from this experience where a lot of teachers have had the opportunity to record lectures, post lectures, and work with more digital tools, what would you say the lessons learned have been? And what would you invite as you plan for the future? What would you invite teachers to do digitally, even when we return face to face?
I think the biggest thing that we're learning is how are we offering supports along the way, and how are we really providing our students that way to be self-reliant. Our students are so strong, and we are so proud of them, and we're realizing that they are really self-reliant and strong if we provide them the supports along the way to really grapple and engage with their material. I think the facilitation of our lessons have become even stronger, and we've found that we can design them even better. So it's been, I think, light speed professional development, and we could all use a nice vacation when it's over. But innovation, it's been exciting. We're exhausted, but I think that we've learned that our students are wonderful and amazing. We've learned the importance of community and relying on one another, and the real importance of caring for one another. I think has been the biggest thing.
Great. And I think that's a great way to kind of end it, great high note. So with that, I'd like to thank you for attending our session. Obviously, if you have questions, would like us to share more about our work, or would like to collaborate with us in this work, please feel free to reach out. So from me, thank you for participating in our presentation.
Thank you.